sometimes the allegation is, yes, there was betrayal trauma when the other person found out. However, there were certain behaviors that were there all through the relationship that for me were also destabilizing, traumatizing, that I couldn't address with him or her.
Okay, let me make sure I got this.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, so just so I'm hearing you before we get into this, you're wondering about or have clients who have this experience. Yes, there was addiction going on and partner did not know. Then partner had discovery and learned, thus a traumatic response occurred, betrayal trauma, we call. And the one who, the addicted here, the betrayer in this situation is saying that previous to discovery, that they experienced trauma via the relationship with that partner before discovery.
Yes.
Did I get it?
Yes, they don't say that that those behaviors caused the acting out.
Uh-huh.
They don't say that. They don't say, hey, they say I can take responsibility. However, there were dynamics such as it could be controlling. They felt controlled. They felt they didn't have a voice in the relationship. They felt that sometimes the partner had explosive behavior or aggressive behavior, and that was present beforehand. And so they're basically saying, hey, there was this dance that the two of us were doing. Yes, I was using addiction to try to deal with my own emotions in general. There was also this dynamic in the relationship.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we're clear too.
Yeah.
So we're talking about impact coming from the partner to the addict, not the other way around. And the impact, because we all know that partners can have a positive impact on the addict in their recovery. We are specifically talking about a painful or traumatic impact on the addict from the partner, either after discovery or pre-discovery. So I just want to say to all the people out there listening, we are limiting this conversation to a very small quadrant of this dynamic, the impact of trauma from the partner to the addict. And I guess the question we're going to start with is, can that actually be a thing?
That's
Dan, I think it's your turn to clarify, because I clarified.
I was just going to say, we're hearing a lot of clarification.
Let's make sure Dan clarifies.
Do you see me squirming over here? I don't know. I'm squirming, so I'm clearly uncomfortable. Because it's a really difficult conversation. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm not really sure where to start. Can it happen? I guess if we're just going to answer yes or no, yes, I do think it can happen. I have a lot of caveats, though. I mean, I have a lot of things that I want to clarify. I mean, we know. So let me just, can I start with like, if I experience a trauma, that's obviously I'm going to have trauma symptoms as a result of that trauma. I'm going to have coping responses. Those coping responses, I think, are a secondary trauma because I maybe become a person I wasn't before. So we hear a lot from partners. I wasn't angry before all this, and now I'm super, I'm angry all the time, and I'm rageful, and so we see that as a trauma response. Would that have an impact on the addict? Yeah, definitely.
And would that be traumatic to the addict?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know what
if it's a significantly abusive event at one particular time, then yes, it could be an overt trauma. If it's an ongoing series of extremely painful interactions with the partner, it can feed into and contribute to the trauma the addict is already feeling. But I agree with you. There's a lot of other contributing factors to this whole dynamic.
Like even taking the historical. So I guess the other piece is, the partner, there may be this dynamic going on, but we know most of the people that are in active addiction are lying. They're engaging in some other form of manipulation, withholding, maybe emotional abuse tactics, and covertly or overtly. And I don't know, as a part of active addiction, it's not just the behaviors, although the behaviors are damaging enough. It's often those things that create huge ruptures in a relationship. So if I'm engaging in emotional abuse stuff, and then my partner's responding to that in a certain way, I don't know. I guess it's hard. I guess it's hard for me to tease apart prior to. Usually the addiction didn't just start one day and then get discovered the next. It was long-standing, probably through the whole history of the relationship. So I can't really tease it apart.
So I am with you. I think the teasing apart of it is exactly what sometimes needs to happen. But I always say, you know, that betrayal trauma needs to be addressed first. And then sometimes we can get to these other layers. Because again, just like you said, Dan, like addiction didn't just start one day. And so therefore, it's been in the undercurrent of the relationship for a while. And maybe overtly or covertly, maybe through emotional abuse out loud in directing with others, but it's been carried through. It's like a contaminating force in the dirt, in the soil. And so is the partner not knowing, but reacting to the undercurrent that something's going on and something's not quite right. And that's creating whatever reaction is happening, that the addict then says, I'm traumatized from the partner's reaction pre-discovery. So again, there's this other, I would say that's another caveat to this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So writing on that, is it a fair statement to say that in your experience, do you see addicts as having a challenge with autonomy? So, and I'll just follow up on this. So I'm seeing more and more where in a relationship with sex addiction, the addict is not able to say, I like this, I don't like this.
Yeah.
And so they sort of take, so that say they defer, which can look like avoidance, but it can also look with like acquiescing. And then the partner steps in and does more, takes over more, makes more decisions. And then can that get twisted then in some way? I use that word twisted as I feel controlled.
I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of my favorite 12-step sayings is scratch an addict, find a codependent. So do addicts deal with autonomy, individuation, sort of like that sense of me being separate from the other person and I don't need to make them to like me? Absolutely. Almost every addict, regardless of their behavior that walks into my office, struggles with um, that tendency to try to manipulate the partner to get them to not be angry, to get them to like them, to get them to be okay. And so if the partner is upset or angry or hurt, the addicts are going to struggle with that. Does that tend to keep them in relationships, or does that tend to avoid actually dealing with some of the problematic situations that may have some of their roots in the partner side? Absolutely. I think that's true. I've seen that in a number of cases. I also think what Jeannie said, which is that might the partner unconsciously be reacting to the addictive pattern? I mean, we see this most commonly with partners that come in and have shut down their sexuality. They're not interested in being sexual. And when we dig into it, one of the causes that we find is this unconscious piece of, I didn't feel safe with the addict being sexual. I felt like an object. And unconsciously, they just sort of shut that down. And oftentimes in the moment, they're as confused as anybody else about, why am I not interested? Where's my libido gone? But really it's an unconscious reaction. So could some of their behaviors and reactions that are painful to the addict be their unconscious coping mechanism, trying to create space or stay safe within a relationship where there's this compulsive sexual pattern going on that they may not even be aware of yet? Absolutely. It still might be painful for the addict, and it still might contribute to the addict's trauma, But there's a much more nuanced understanding about what's going on there than just, the partner is traumatizing me, and I don't hear them saying it's their fault, but I almost wonder if that's implied.
Where I do see trauma sometimes with addicts is, as we were talking earlier, is in the discovery process. When the truth is coming out and their loved one is in such pain, and the addicts are horrified by their action and they feel such shame. And so then there's a panic, we fight, flight, freeze, a panic response, and I'll do whatever they want because I don't want them to leave. And so their panic, I would say, is traumatizing, because sometimes I see that panic lasts for a long period of time, like multiple months, which is hard because we have to soothe that trauma reaction for them to actually start to work their recovery for them and their relationship. But I see trauma in that, where some addicts, later they'll go like, yes, I really see the trauma of it in hindsight, because I was just trying to do everything I could, because I really wanted this to work out, and I felt such pain about my own behavior. But I'm still circling back to the starting question here, Wendy, about partners traumatizing addicts pre-discovery. So,
and maybe can I broaden it out, because I don't know if traumatizing's the right word, but we do need to say every relationship has issues. There's never an all good person and all bad person in any relationship. So I think that's the complexity of this. And I have to hold this sometimes when I'm working with an addict, that they'll say, yeah, but there's these other things. And I have to say, yeah, sure. I'm sure there's some things in your relationship that could legitimately need, couples therapy, kind of traditional couples therapy. But we have a huge wound right now that happened because of your actions, and the betrayal and the rupture that was caused by your actions that your partner didn't cause. Like, you caused that. So I don't know. I hold these two things in tension, that there's every couple has issues going on that contribute to each other. And we have rupture from betrayal that was caused by the addict. So how do we hold that? Is that traumatizing? I don't know. Those other kind of general couples issues, maybe. I'm not sure.
Well, there's also a piece when you step into recovery, which is not blaming yourself for other people's actions, but taking responsibility for your side. And so it might be for the addict that, yeah, my partner, pick your poison. My partner had anger issues. My partner was really controlling and wouldn't let me do anything. My partner was incapable of doing anything on their own, and I took all the responsibility. Whatever it was that the addict found so painful and difficult. But the addict in their recovery step is, and yet I didn't address that. I went into my addiction to escape. I ignored it. I just put up with it and let it happen. I didn't ever step up and say, this is absolutely not working for me. It's not, and I can't stay in a relationship if this is going to be the dynamic moving forward. So it might be that all that stuff was going on there. And I don't want to blame the addict for the partner's patterns if they're problematic, but the addict can also step in recovery and say, yeah, and I let it happen, and I avoided it, and I chose to escape. Now, we can have compassion on understanding that there's an addiction pattern going on and addiction neurology and their own trauma underneath that, and why they made the choices that they made. But that doesn't mean that they don't look at it and say, yeah, I wasn't able to at that point. And doesn't that suck?
Yeah, sort of what was my part. So have you ever had an addict say, I am now realizing that my partner really enabled my sex addiction? Okay, as I was acting out through the course of the relationship, he really enabled it. Have you heard that? I'm trying to think if I.
Well, I don't know that
I've
I've heard those words. I mean, I've heard partners stepping in to participate, in some of the addictive behaviors, and typically that was in an attempt to stay connected to the addict.
Mhm.
And some partners, were comfortable with those behaviors. Some partners felt like that was outside their comfort zone of what they would have chosen to do. But I don't know that I would have called that enabling.
Mhm.
Are you hearing that, Wendy?
Am I hearing addicts say
yeah.
my partner enabled me? No. Generally, no. Which I find interesting because with other addictions, we hear it a lot.
Yeah, isn't that an interesting point? In the other addictions, we hear it a lot, but I too, I don't hear it like that. I've heard sometimes some other more blaming statements that get then educated, and then they turn around on those blaming statements and take accountability. But the using the word enabling, or the concept of enabling, I'll agree with Tim that there have been clients who sometimes knowingly and sometimes unknowingly engaged in certain behavior because they were trying to, they thought, help the addict not go into certain behaviors. You know, if I participate with you in this sexual experience, you therefore won't do X, Y, or Z. But I haven't heard that kind of enabling piece.
I just think it's different though, too. I mean, if someone who's using and going on a weekend bender and isn't able to function or show up to work on Monday, and the partner makes a phone call to a boss and makes an excuse or something, like, we don't see that generally as much with our clients. I mean, we do see it sometimes, but not generally, because many of my clients are also addicted to work and success and money and other stuff. So they want to function at work, so they don't miss those responsibilities a lot of times.
I don't think I've had any partner report that they knew that the addict was up all night looking at porn and they called the office to say he can't make it in.
Right.
I don't, those just aren't stories that I hear. I mean, maybe they happen out there, but I just don't hear those stories.
Mhm. Mhm.
Circling back to, can the partner traumatize the addict? We are very careful when we're working with addicts and partners not to label the partner coming in the front door when they're first coming into our therapy session, because we know that 9 times out of 10 there's a lot of trauma sitting on that partner, and the partner's behavior is going to be significantly impacted by that trauma. At the same time, when that partner has done a good chunk of work and we've cleared off as much of that trauma as we can, when that's cleared off, sometimes there's some really problematic stuff on the partner side. Not always. That's not the rule of thumb, but it can be that on the partner side there's some pretty problematic relational stuff or just interpersonal interaction stuff that might show up that has been impacting the addict. Again, doesn't take responsibility off the addict, but you know, and we never do that. And any addicts listening out there, you know, early recovery, we do not make those assessments because we see dramatic changes in partners from when they first walk through our door to 9 months to a year later.
Mhm.
But there might be something on the partner side that's sitting there.
Well, and absolutely, there can be that. I mean, like Dan was saying, like every relationship has struggles, and sometimes those struggles are very problematic in the relationship, and that doesn't dismiss or discount the addictive behavior or the betrayal trauma behavior. So we first have to, this is back to that old expression of coming into the hospital through the ER. You've got a gunshot wound and they're diabetic. Which do you address first? You address the gunshot wound. And that's the betrayal trauma. And that's the sobriety and the addiction. And then, okay, that piece is now addressed in best its way. And then we deal with what else is underneath. But it really comes into a first case. But there could be, and there have been partners who at times have been emotionally abusive, physically abusive, whether before discovery or after discovery. And again, I still say pre-discovery, what was going on in sort of the ethos of the relationship. So we're never, and I'm assuming you all too, like never say anyone's perfect or anyone's problemless. There are always things to work on, and some are more damaging.
You know,
So,
we're having
so
this.
I just want to let everyone know, that you're listening to Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. And welcome if you are just tuning in now. Otherwise, we're continuing a conversation regarding, can a partner traumatize an addict?
I was just going to say that what this is coming to, that in my opinion, our culture does very poorly, is the idea of yes and. We tend to want to make things all or nothing, one way or the other. And sort of what we've come to is that partners are traumatized, and there might be some stuff underneath that trauma that's problematic. That doesn't mean that there is. It doesn't mean that there isn't. And if there's those other things underneath, it doesn't mean that the trauma hasn't impacted the partner and doesn't need to be addressed. You know, it's not one or the other, that we're dealing with a very complex dynamic and a very complex human being, and likely it's a yes and.
Do you guys?
Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't want to throw this. I feel like it's on topic, so if it's not, let me know. You guys know that UCLA study. I think Roy Reed did it. What did you say, Jeannie?
It's not on topic.
It's not on topic. She's just gonna cut me off. That dressed. Remember this old saying that partners of sex addicts are sicker than their husbands? This old terrible saying.
Oh,
Remember this? Well, they studied it at UCLA. So they gave psych testing to a group of partners, and I don't know all the metrics and stuff, but they actually studied it. You know what they found? No conclusive results. Partners of sex addicts did not have any underlying, on the whole, underlying psychopathology. So, personality disorders and other major stuff.
excellent.
So doesn't mean they don't have stuff, and it doesn't mean they, some may, and some may have personality disorders as the general population does. But I don't know. If that's on topic or not, I think we at least have to say that, because I think another problem we have in our society is victim blaming. And when we see someone engaging in certain behaviors, it's unfortunately terrible that we tend to look at the victim and what responsibility they had for those behaviors. So I don't know. It's a tough conversation. that's all I'm saying.
No, thanks for bringing that new research in. I think that's really helpful. I wanted to put a question to you all, and just, I think I know where I stand on this one, but so in this discussion, can a partner traumatize an addict? We often use frame reference of male addict, betrayed partner, female. If you flip it and we're talking male partners, would your thoughts be any different? Everyone, for the listeners, everyone is deeply thinking right now.
Go ahead, Tim.
I was going to say, I think it would be the same. My thought. I think as a culture, we tend to view men as more likely to be abusive and traumatic to other people because of the way that their pain shows up. Women are more likely to sort of go into themselves and become passive aggressive or controlling. Men are more likely to get big and angry and aggressive to try to get their outgoing. But I think at the core, I think the male addict, the male partner is probably doesn't have any more characterological issues than a female partner does. And they have probably an equal chance of traumatizing the addict as a female partner does. It might look different in how the process takes place.
You know what I have seen though, and I don't know how to define this. And I don't, maybe this is just a small sample, I'm not sure, but I have seen some male partners, let's say if they're in relationship with a woman, will almost stalk the other man. Like they make it violent, maybe not towards their partner, but towards the other person involved. If they know who that person is, that's when I get a little scared, because I don't know what they'll do to that person. And I don't know. So I have seen that dynamic play out a little differently than partners may find. They may be a verbal altercation, but I'm worried about a male engaging in something physical with another guy.
That's a little different. Right there, we're talking about the differences of the way the men tend to, not everybody, show their trauma symptomology and pain. The following behavior.
I've had some partners come up with some pretty interesting scenarios on what they're going to do confronting acting out partners. And a number of them that followed through, and it almost got violent. It was close. It was close, the confrontation. There's another aspect, because we're saying more on the aggressive side, but then also the flip side to wounding is abandonment. And so I'll say that I was in a relationship with a sex addict, and after many, many years, was able to say, okay, so could I have contributed not to the addiction, but to the triggering? And I was at a point where my career was changing. I have a tendency to be a workaholic. And I dove into this new career full on. And over the years, I've had to stop and say, I basically left the relationship. Now, was he acting out? And was I feeling rejected or abandoned in some way? And then I turned to career. If I'm being completely honest, I probably was being pretty focused on myself at that point. So it's something that I've thought about over the years of not that I caused it. There's no way I could have caused the addiction. But could I have fueled that abandonment wound?
Yeah.
Could have.
And that's an interesting point that you're making, which is there are, I am sure, plenty of actions that partners do in relationship with the addict that feed into the addict's already underlying trauma and those trauma experiences, patterns, and wounds. There might be some behaviors or some choices that partners make that may create new trauma wounds or may exacerbate some to make them more significant than they were before. But I think that there's definitely a pattern where partners are their behaviors are tapping into wounds that are already pre-existing and are very sensitive for the addict, that are, and then the addict does what they do because what they've learned to do neurologically and behaviorally is go act out and not feel it.
Yeah, I think about when women start having children, that acting out can really increase at that time. And I've had men say, yeah, all of a sudden, it was just me and her, and then now all of a sudden there are these kiddos popping up, and the attention is redirected, and frankly, I feel left out. It's not something they're proud to say, right? Because as an adult, you want to be able to understand and go with the flow with these things. But
I'm impressed that they can say that. Most of the addicts I work with, when that dynamic comes up, don't have the wherewithal of that feeling abandoned. They just feel that there's something that is overwhelming to them, and they just feel this huge addictive urge to go act out, and often it leads to a relapse. But that insight that your clients are talking about, which is, I just felt like it was just the two of us, and now there's this other one, and I'm feeling abandoned. And impressive that you have worked with them and got to the point where they can have that insight. But it hasn't been my experience that level of insight is common.
I don't know if I can take credit for that. A lot of times they've done some residential work, some IOP work. So
No, I think it's you. I think you're an amazing therapist.
oh, thank you, Tim.
Yay.
The abandonment one, what do you think, Jeannie, Dan?
Oh, I love it. I love it. That's not okay. So redo on that one. I thought it was a very interesting perspective on the other side. So when we think trauma, we think aggressive, or a lot of people do. And you were expanding that definition to include the emotional abandonment. And so when we do that, I think a partner could traumatize an addict by activating that abandonment wound, or leaving the relationship, creating an abandonment, but I would say that it's not purposeful. It's not to traumatize. It's not to control. It's not to dominate. But by virtue of possible choices a partner may make, might reactivate or create that wound. So for me, I liked it because it was a little bit of a nuance that we weren't talking about when we think and we're talking about trauma. So I appreciate you bringing that part up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I was just thinking of a physical analogy, if I broke a bone in my body and it never got it set well, if someone, let's say I broke my foot, something in my foot, and then if my partner steps on my foot, it's going to be understandably injured and painful, but that wasn't the original injury potentially. So there was a trauma initially and it got reactivated. So I could see that both could be true, but I think it's probably an exacerbation of a previous trauma, typically with our addicts.
Thanks for bringing the question to the group, Wendy. I think it's been a really interesting conversation for us.
Absolutely. Thank you for all our listeners. If you liked this episode, please like us, follow us, share it with who you think might gain some help or insight. Also, we love to hear from you. So if you have comments or questions, we actually do episodes that are called mailbag episodes where we read your question and then have a conversation around that. And the email on that is conversations.sar@gmail.com.
It's not just me. Good.
Yeah, it's a hard one.
Rocked it. Good job.
So, but we really, really, we would love to hear from you. And so thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.